Welcome, everybody, to the second session of the Beregovski Online Forum. We are so excited to have some really amazing scholars, thinkers, musicians, historians, cultural activists, and tradition bearers here. And we're going to delve into a bit of the story of how this work was published, and especially how the English editions were published. And of course, being an instrumentalist, I love to talk about the instrumental stuff, but Beregovski's work on vocal music was extremely important as well, and that was indeed the first, part of the first edition that was published in English. So we'll get there. We'll also go back to the earlier Russian and Soviet editions. But first, let's get to know our wonderful special guest contestants, as I called them last time, on the Beregovski is Right. So I will introduce everybody. We'll go down the line as I see it. And let's start with Mr. Michael Alpert.
Around here they call me Hamish Maccabee. I live in the East Nuke of Fife in Scotland. I live here. And if you see me looking up at you, I'm watching sheep. I've been called by Mark Slobin, another one of our contestants here, and a venerable one, a key figure in the world klezmer phenomenon or something like that. And in this context, I translated most of and annotated, in particular, the Beregovski klezmer volume, both the version, the first edition that was published by Syracuse University Press and came out in 2001, edited by our own Mark Slobin and Robert Rothstein, and as well as working with Kurt on the second 2015 edition, which he revised in wonderfully, particularly the musical transcriptions. But we talked a lot about we went back to the manuscript. He would ask me what it actually said in Russian, Yiddish, etc. So that's why and I want to be a klezmer.
Great, thank you so much for joining us, Michael. Yeah, we'll keep on moving down the line. Mark Slobin, you are up next on my roster.
Hi, I'll talk in a couple of minutes a little bit more about the origin of the first edition that I did in 1982 and give it a little more contextualization. As you all know, I'm an ethnomusicologist who has worked in many different areas, published in a variety of things, but my particular love was getting to these roots of Yiddish expressive culture and bringing them out for people to share.
Yeah, we are so excited to hear a lot of that story, and we'll come back to you shortly. Mila.
Hi, I'm Mila Sholokhova. I've started my career at the Vernadski National Library of Ukraine at the very beginning when the collections of Moshe Beregovsky and Ansky and Kisselgov were discovered, and I was very fortunate to be there to get immediate access to all these materials. And my connection with these materials has continued over the years, and I'm still working with these materials, still in touch with my colleagues there. And it's an amazing journey, and I think it's a lifelong journey, actually. Apart from this, I was also director of the YIVO library and kind of associate director for external affairs with Russia and Eastern Europe. Sometimes I was also director of the archives. That's basically my career. Currently, I'm teaching Yiddish at the Columbia University for this semester.
We're so grateful for the work you've done at YIVO, and I think everybody that I know in this field is just has gotten so much from your work there, and so we're very appreciative of that, as well as all the work that you've done with the Beregovsky stuff and in Vernadski.
Sure, it was really, I feel very lucky to have all this in my life, both YIVO and Vernadski.
Nice. And we're lucky to have you in our lives. So thank you for joining us. Now we'll move to the next contestant, which is Christina Crowder, who is sort of both a contestant and my co-moderator, partner in crime here. Hey, Christina.
Yeah, I think I'm a musician and a researcher, and I'm really here mostly for technical support in the end of the day. I come to Beregovski literally decades after all of the rest of you here began working with him. So I think that's about it for me.
Thank you so much. It's technical support is key these days. It's becoming a more and more technical world.
Right, it is.
So, Mr. Emeritus Bob, Robert Rothstein, you are down the line there. Hey, Bob.
Hi, thank you. I'm probably the only non-musician in the group. Officially, I'm a Slavic linguist, but gradually I moved more in the direction of folkloristics, and I'm interested in texts more than melodies, although I did discover that the melody for Papirosin was not written by Herman Yablokov, but was a Romanian Jewish melody that was brought to Bulgaria and so on and so forth. I've written about things like Yiddish songs of drunkenness. What else? I had something else I was going to say, but I've forgotten already. That's short-term memory. I'm delighted to be part of this. I hope I can contribute something.
Yeah, we're so delighted to have you. Luckily, we'll be after your long-term memory a bit more than the short-term, so we'll try our luck with that later. Thank you, Bob. And let's say hello quickly to Miss Sasha Lurje, who is helping also in the moderation.
Hi. I'm also basically here for moderation. I'm a Yiddish singer, and I have been involved in all of this, but nowhere near as most of our contestants today. So I'm happy to be Craig's partner in crime here.
Yes, and we are happy to have you. Great. Let's move along the line to Mr. Izaly Zemtsovsky, who I think unfortunately has not been nearly as known as you should be. Hey, Izaly.
Hello, I don't know, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, what can I say? I feel that I'm kind of a savior here because everything began with my birthday, 22nd of February 1966. I was 30 years old. And that very day, I celebrate my birthday at Beregovski apartment. And older daughter of Beregovski, Irina, greeted me as a close friend and said, "How happy we are that you came to save our archive." And the rest of the history, which I am going to tell in details today more. As for introduction myself, I knew that I am not so good maybe in speaking, and I put some introduction in writing in your forum site, it was a couple of days ago.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So I am just waiting for your questions and I'm ready to tell different stories. The beginning of that archive in '66, then how it was brought to America in 1989, and why it's only in 1989, not before. It's a special story. And how I was able to publish one article of Beregovski in 1973. It's totally detective story, which will tell you more if you would like to. So yes. I'm here as a storyteller, and I'm going to tell you different stories from different moments. And actually, I was organizer of the first international conference dedicated to Beregovski. It was in 1992. So I am ready for your questions, and I'm keeping my bag of answers.
Yes, I think yeah, we will come to all of these stories. I think you may be the only one here who actually risked his life for Beregovsky, I think. But I wonder, can you just give us a couple sentences about the work you did in Russia and just like a tiny bit of the work you do in California now?
Okay. In Russia, I used to work at the Institute of the History of the Arts, which in different times have different names. But original name and today name is the Russian Institute for the History of the Arts. I worked there since 1960 till 1996, so 36 years. And after that, I came to Berkeley, where I was invited as a block professor in music to deliver a cycle of lectures about Russian Jewish composers. And one of my lectures was about Beregovsky. And after that, I am here and there. I used to teach was mainly Russian music and Russian Jewish music classes and folklore classes at Berkeley University, Stanford University, Wisconsin Madison University. And currently I am director. It sounds very important. Director of the Silk Road House as a cultural and educational center in Berkeley. Well, I'm working with my wife, who is the president of the Silk Road House. So we have a very distinguished family, president and director all together. So such is my life. I have many publications, dozen of books, about 600 articles on different topics, mainly ethnomusicology, folklore. Being a student of Vladimir Krov, maybe you know this name. It's a well-known folklorist.
Right.
I have, triple education as a musicologist, as a composer, and as a folklorist. So here I am.
The man who knows too much. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an extreme honor to have you and to meet you, actually. I think...
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with all of you. Thank you very much.
Yes, yeah. Okay. I think before we get into all these stories, it might help us to have a little bit of context for all of this. I'm sure some of our folks out there in Radioland know more, and some know less about Beregovsky's work, and also about what it was like to do this work in the Soviet Union, and perhaps about Mark's work and how that brought him there. But let's get a little bit of introduction to all that, and then I think we'll loop back to how Beregovsky worked and how Izaly came to that and such. Okay, take it away, Mark.
Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the run-up to Old Jewish Folk Music, 1982, which connects to the context of Beregovsky and his generation. That volume was actually the second time I translated a work of Soviet ethnomusicology. The first one appeared in 1975, which was a textbook on Central Asian music, an area I share with Izaly and Alma as an area. I had been to the Soviet Union, to Central Asia, and met ethnomusicologists there, both indigenous and Russian ethnomusicologists. So, and I wrote an article back in '71 already about the structure of Soviet ethnomusicology and how it worked. So I was able to understand Beregovsky a little in his context, and actually met a couple of his contemporaries. And I could kind of see that. And then Izaly gave me a much more thorough grounding in the context in which this guy was working. It was extremely hard for people to do that work in the 1920s, and it got way harder in the 1930s as Stalin took over and controlled the system with insane punishment for transgression of any sort. You could die, or you could be sent to the Gulag. I'll just throw out one example for you. The guy whose work I translated first, Viktor Mikhailovich Belyaev, worked in Uzbekistan and published a book. He was working there when Beregovsky was working with Yiddish stuff. He was working with Uzbek stuff. He came out with a book in 1933, which pointed out accurately that the Uzbeks had a scale with 17 tones to the octave. They had a microtonal modal system, after which he was silenced from writing anything for about 25 years. Okay, so when you think of Beregovski, probably knew that story. These were the things that were happening around him. So I'm just bringing that personally. I had that background. Beregovski was in the context of a very difficult, extremely critical and dangerous situation doing the work he did. So in terms of understanding his work, we have to always do a bit of interpretation of one sort or another, which I tried to do in the introduction to my edition, and another article I wrote a little bit later about Beregovski that was published in Ethnomusicology. I came to Beregovski when I switched from Central Asian and Afghanistan music to Yiddish culture in 1973. I met Chana Mlotek, and she is a key person who has not really been mentioned much here. She said, all these sources, if you're going to get into Yiddish culture, we have this stuff here. I had never heard of it. I was knocked out by it, and I began to, and I said, what do you mean nobody has access to this if they don't know Russian or Yiddish? She said, exactly. So I said, wait, I should do something about this. This is the kind of thing I do. I'm a filial piety fellow. I feel like you have to pay tribute to the ancestors and people, the predecessors. So that's how I did Old Jewish Folk Music on the basis of published materials. It was not from manuscript. It was from the first volume of his folk song, which had been published. It was from then the edition that Izaly put out, the publications Izaly put out in the late 60s, early 70s. There were some published things in the Soviet Union that I had access to, and I simply put them out there. And then I translated the song text at the end to give people some access to that. So it included his essays and those actual music notation materials. That was the story. I can't resist one anecdote about Old Jewish folk music, just one very quickly. It was submitted to the American Folklore Society series and the University of Pennsylvania. I heard back from readers, and then it still wasn't accepted. I said, what's the hang up? The editor said, I shouldn't tell you, but you know how many parts that book is? And this was before, I'm just telling you this for technology history. I had paper clipped them together, and you couldn't just do sequential pagination. And when you typed something, you couldn't do that. So I had sent it, and each section had its own paperclip. And he said, the guy who was supposed to write the last review, it fell off his desk, his cat knocked it over, and it was on the floor, and he couldn't bring himself to sort out this manuscript, figure out where the paper clips belong, because there were so many different things in it. So that delayed the publication of Old Jewish Folk Music by some months, just as an historical footnote, and how scholarship really works, even in the US of A. It's not the easiest thing in the world. Okay, I will pass it on from here, and that's probably enough for now, right? Right, Craig?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really incredible. I think so often we read these things and just take it for granted that they exist and that they're in the form that they are in, and well, of course this is in English, because it's such an important work, but obviously there were a lot of times when it wasn't, and besides all the challenges of working in Soviet system, there's just a whole lot of things that go into this. So first of all, thank you so much for all your work and for deciding at that time that it was so important, and then for following through and for all the stuff that's come out of that. So yeah, we will sort of loop back and dig into some more of those details. But I think, as you mentioned, Izaly's work was really key, besides the actual work he did, but also the fact that, as I understand it, he got you, sort of some manuscripts, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So Izaly, how did you come to know even about Beregovski and his work in the first place?
Well, good question. Actually, his publication in 1962 was a kind of a bomb for Russian folkloristics and musicology, because after World War II, it was the first decent musical publication. And it was so good, and it was so authentic for us. That book returns us to our Jewish soul.
Mm. And
You know,
sorry,
it was a very serious moment.
can you clarify which book exactly?
Jewish folk songs, 1962.
Uh-huh.
That was a book, a kind of compromise, because Beregovski was not allowed to publish a real set of his 5 volumes. So they offered him to make a compromise to publish kind of short anthology of folk songs. And he did it. But unfortunately, he didn't see it. He died before the book came out.
Right.
When the book came out, I've been already, it's very important to know geographically, I've been already a member of the Union of Composers of Soviet Union. So I had the right to be in special places, so-called Dom Compositorov, House of Composers, where I met Naum Perkovsky, Jewish composer who used to live there. Perkovsky was also from Kiev. And when he learned how I am excited about the book 1962, he said me, you know, you have to go to Kiev. Beregovski's sister is living there, the same apartment. And if you would like to learn something, you have to work with Beregovsky. And I wrote a letter. He gave me address of Irina. I still keep this address. Kiev, улица Аллы Тарасовой, building 4, apartment 7. Even phone number, 992288567. Phone number of Beregovsky.
Wow.
Well, and I wrote to Irina, just in case for the record. Irina born in 1923 and died 1996. Her younger daughter, Eda, born 1929 and died 2011. So when I came to Kiev, I came after Irina wrote me welcome letter. Come anytime you can. And 21st of that letter I received 18th of February 1966. And 21st of February I took plane and by Aeroflot, went to Kiev. That very day I visited the apartment, amazing apartment by the way, pretty big from my point of view. One room was when they met me, another room was almost empty without furniture, but a lot of manuscripts and everything, that was archive of Beregovsky. And the third room was absolutely amazing. It's a room filled by unsent letters. The husband of Irina was a post officer, and he could not get rid of those letters which were not delivered. And can you imagine, in one apartment we have so symbolic 2 rooms. Archive was not kept, and letters was kept. 2 rooms, kind of very strange additional archive. 22nd of February, I came exactly for work with archive already, but my mom called me to Irina. Irina learned that day I have a birthday. So she organized a big celebration to me, with wine, with good food, with everything. Was, I was like a member of their family. And she said, my father was dreamed to have his archive being transported to Petersburg. He believes that Petersburg is less anti-Semitic than Kiev. Well, it's hard to say exactly who is more, who is less anti-Semitic, and I am not take to myself this to judge. I myself defended my doctorate in Kiev, so I was greeted by the same person who actually persecuted Beregovski. So time changes, you know. Anyway, I made what I could, and at that time you have to just imagine that we have to somehow to make official legal documents that I am taking those archives. And at that time we had neither computer nor even typewriter. So that historical document was written by my handwriting. And that my document now kept at my institute in Russia. Everything enumerated what I took. Actually, it was not only manuscript. Besides those famous 5 volumes, I took many articles, manuscripts, and index cards. Do you know what index card? Probably nobody of you using this index card nowadays.
When we were young.
I worked I used to work in a museum. I used index cards.
But you know, but I used to work with index cards all my life. And here in my apartment, I have about 18,000 those.
Wow.
Look at them. This is index card. And Beregovski worked with index card as well. And it was a really different material, not only Jewish material, but also material which Ukrainian, Bashkir, and from different period of his life. After I went home through Moscow already by train, because you know it was a huge amount of papers, and not only papers. It was a remarkable box with Vox cylinders, with sound recordings. And when I came eventually to my institute, I suggest that we have to donate that Vox cylinders to our phonogram archives, academic phonogram archives, because it requires special technical conditions to be kept properly. And I delivered those Vox cylinders to Pushkinsky Dom, we say, phonogram archive of Pushkin House in Petersburg. And they copied it. And actually, I obtained copies of those copies. So I have those copies. So at least 18 Vox cylinders copied I have kept here at my apartment right now. And if you would like to have it, I can try to copy it to the disk, and you will have it.
The old-time version of music.
Now, second story, if you would like to tell.
Can I ask you some questions first?
Of course.
There's so much we don't want to forget. Did you listen to these recordings when you got them, or only you listened to the copies?
Only 2 copies, because it was impossible. We don't have phonograph.
Yeah, and the first the book in '62 that you read, was it? How did you find the book? Like, was it very common to find this, or was it because you were a composer?
No, it was possible. If you go in good time, you can have it.
That's the book I used. It's in old Jewish folk music. That was the first. Yeah, that's the book I used. It was published regular publication. You could buy it.
It was published in a special series books, edited by Aksyuk. It's last name of one Russian musicologist, who actually edited all books, not only, mainly Russians, of course.
Mm-hmm. And when it came out,
it was very important to have his umbrella, because his umbrella, it was very good for our censorship. If Aksuk edited it, it means censorship will say, go ahead.
Ah, and was it mostly, you think, important and valued by Jewish musicians and musicologists, or everybody took this as a big moment when it was published?
I cannot tell about everybody.
Yeah.
But as for Jews, it was a big holiday.
Uh-huh. And before that, as Jew in Soviet Union, you had some other references of Jewish music?
Yes, of course. I knew Beregovski in 1934, which came in two versions, in Yiddish and Russian. And I did not know myself, but thanks to Mike Alpert, I had another book, 1938, published in Yiddish.
Right.
But that book I was not able to obtain being in Russian.
Mm-hmm. And when do you remember the first time you heard Beregovsky's name or about him? Sorry, I know it's a long time.
Well, I don't like to tell some mythology.
Uh-huh.
But I don't remember exactly the day and the hour.
No.
but I know for sure that the first person who taught me about Beregovsky professionally was Naum Perkovsky, which I mentioned at the beginning.
Uh-huh, right.
So it was, we talked him beginning 1962.
Uh-huh.
So beginning 1962, of course I knew Beregovsky, but I don't remember how I came to his name. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah. You wanted to tell another story, I think, yes?
Yes, another story, it's about that article which published in 1973, which Mark Slobin translated so beautifully. You know, when I got that archive, I realized that we have to work somehow with him. And I invited very interesting person, Aaron Vinkovetsky. Maybe you know his name. Aaron Vinkovetsky immigrated to Israel and published with some support of Israeli scholars 4 volumes of Yiddish folk songs. He was not a musician. He was a builder, working in the Builder Institute. But he was a big lover of Yiddish, and he knew by heart hundreds of Jewish songs, and was looking for someone who will put them, down by notation. And he approached me, and I connected him with a young composer who helped me out. But in reply, I asked Vinkovetsky, please begin working with Beregovsky archive, because very little people who knows in my institute Yiddish, you know it perfectly, and make a description and start to translate something. And Vinkovetsky worked hardly and made a great job and published something even in Soviet Union, and Birbizhan Stern published something about that archive. But he immigrated and did not finish his work of translation. And I decided to publish myself somehow, at least what was written by Beregovsky in Russian. And that article was written in Russian. But how to publish? Jewish topic was 100% forbidden. And you cannot imagine, I invented the whole series of books, new books, named Folklore and Folkloristics. And I decided to do it, step by step, to start with something from Soviet point of view terribly kosher, It should be Russian and Slavic book. And I decided, okay, in 1968 will be Congress of Slavists, International Slavist Congress. And I will prepare a book dedicated to that Congress, and it will open the series. But you know, Jewish luck. In 1968, Soviet army invaded Prague. And at that very time, Congress of Slavists began working. So publishers stopped working with me and said, you have to prove that all authors of your book are loyal to Soviet regime. But after that, you know, 1970, it speaks nothing to you, 1970. But 1970 was 100 years of the birth of Lenin. That meant everything in my country at that time. So all editions were stopped, and green line was given only for topics dedicated to Lenin. And that publishers told me, if you would like to have published your Slavic book, you have to first publish a book about folklore about Lenin. Oh my goodness. I had no idea whether there is folklore about Lenin.
Right.
And I began writing letters to all my colleagues and friends and all the former Soviet republics. Please help me. If you have any songs about Lenin, send me. You have to do something. The best answer I got from Estonia, from Tallinn. Estonia wrote to me, as Estonian people never sang about Lenin. Other republics were more polite and sent me everything, and can you imagine I published that book. Folklore about Lenin. It was #1. So Slavic book came #2. And now it was time to prepare something with Beregovski. In order to publish it, I first of all decided do not have my own article in that book, and to invite as many as possible representatives of so-called minorities, ethnic minorities of Russia. And that book has something 31, I guess, article about very small nationalities inhabited from the Soviet Union. But I knew that it was not enough for our censorship. And I invented a special section of the book from archives and put there 2 articles by Belyaev, that Belyaev which Mark mentioned today, and 1 article by Beregovski. And it was absolutely okay from censor point of view, because it was all people of Soviet Union, it was archives, and Jews was just with the variant of the book, 1 article, who cares, and it was sent to the publisher.
Wow.
So it was 1973. And thanks to Mark who mentioned it. By the way, I am sure that person who put me in contact with Mark and was my, savior in America was Barbara Crowder. She was an amazing woman. She spoke many languages, including Yiddish, by the way, being Welsh herself. But her husband was Jewish. When I presented her my anthology of Golden Jewish folk songs, she immediately began reading Yiddish. I was impressed. But anyway, I had experience how to publish in America without censorship because of Barbara. They invited me to write something for Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians. But at that time, it was absolutely impossible to write something, to put in the envelope, and to send to America. It was forbidden. you have to get a lot of whole levels of permissions from your institute, from Communist Party Committee, from KGB, from Moscow Ministry of Culture. It was a long process. And I really realized that if I go through the whole process, my article never will be in America.
Right.
So I wrote Barbara, Barbara, let me do another way. I will write you a series of letters. Dear Barbara, you asked me about such and such and such things. Allow me to reply to you in this letter. By my handwriting, I sent her maybe a dozen of letters, which in the summary at the end turned out to be my publications in World Dictionary.
Wow.
So when Barbara connected me to Mark, I'm sure it was Barbara who connected me to Mark.
And how did you know Barbara?
Oh, Barbara, she is amazing. Barbara was working with, in the Library of Congress in the 60s. And one colleague of mine visited the Library of Congress. And Barbara approached him with, tell me, who is Zemtsovsky? Who is Izaly? I know his publications. I would like to have all his publications. And when he came back to Russia, he said, why I have to send your books to Barbara? Send yourself. So, so I sent everything what I published by that time to Barbara. We became friends. In 1971, we finally met in Bulgaria. And already we spoke about Mark. And Barbara told me, Izaly, you have to meet Mark Slobin. He is the most important person in your American life, will be. Barbara even did not know how right she was, because Mark indeed was a very important person in our life. He even wrote affidavit of support when I applied for citizenship. So Mark was extremely important in our family life, not only in our scholarly life. So I wrote a letter to Mark that now I have in my possession, and we have to think something about publication. And I had keep a copy of a letter of Mark, dated 12th of October 1987. Letter in Russian. Let me read it in Russian. It's very short. Mark normally very short in correspondence. Extremely short. And here. Ваша идея опубликовать материалы Береговского просто гениальная. И я очень надеюсь, что это осуществимо. На это нужно время, но возможность замечательная. И я сделаю все, что могу. Well, I hope many who didn't understand.
I had a translation.
It says your idea of publishing Beregovsky is a genius idea. I'll do everything possible to make this happen.
Right.
The right answer.
So it was 1987. But, as I told you, to send by post, like a parcel, to put to Mark those volumes, it was absolutely impossible. Forget about it. So we have to find a way how to deliver it in person. But, it was not enough to be a Jewish. I was not communist. And that combination, to be not a member of Communist Party, to be Jewish, it means it was not allowed to go to America.
Right. Or anywhere.
And suddenly, in 1988, it was another miracle in my life. Again, in my birthday, it's SARS. I got a call from Ministry of Culture. Will the Smithsonian Institution Festival this year with the participation of Soviet Union. we need a consultant who might be professional enough in many cultures of Soviet Union. And we were told that you're such a person who can be of help. Would you agree to go to the United States? So when I finished that conversation, my wife Alma told me, if you are going to the United States, I will trust Perestroika.
Wow.
So in 1988, I went to Washington, D.C. And that very time, Mark Slobin went to Soviet Union, to Lyudmila, where he met Alma at the first American-Soviet symposium, ethnomusicological symposium. When I came back from Washington, D.C., I learned that they planned another symposium, Soviet American, which will be in Western University. And Mark's supposed to host that symposium. And I decided, okay, it's my time. It means time of Beregovski. I have to be included in that group who goes to America. And normally I was very modest person, and especially being in Petersburg, I never been in Moscow. And between Moscow and Petersburg, not so friendly relationships historically. And of course, they did not like to include me in that group. But I went to Moscow in person. I said, if you don't include me in this time, I will make a stand. Can you imagine Izaly making a scandal? I cannot. But anyway, it was said, and I was included in that group. And I came to Western University with that instrumental volume copied in full. It was a happy beginning. Next year, Alma brought another volume, Yegunin, I guess. And 2 years later, I brought a poem space. So our family, together with Mark, obtained that miraculous volumes, and it was through YIVO. I don't know that in 1989, my second trip to America, I was invited to YIVO with some presentation. And then I met Dina Abramovich, wonderful librarian there. Well, it's another story. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, there's so much here.
That was the beginning of our work.
Yeah.
And next it's better to listen to Mark and BOF.
Yeah, I think we'll keep moving along and come back to some of this, I hope.
Yes. But after that, the only topic that I would like to share with you later, it was that international conference dedicated to Beregovski in 1992. But that's another topic. If it would be interesting, I will tell you. But now let me finish.
Yeah. Also, there's, I believe, a story of you telling the Soviet authorities that you had a Russian opera score or something. Yes.
Oh yeah, yes. How do you know?
I know the right people.
Well, it's another story. Well, I used to work in the Gnesin archives. Well, everything would be different. It would be different in my life if not American post office. Because, I was stupid enough to send my index card and everything what I prepared was a book of the songs by post. And it was destroyed. I never received it. And, how I survived that, don't ask me. Well, okay. let me better to answer your questions. Otherwise, you will never stop me.
Hi, Izaly. That's thank you for regaling us with all these amazing stories and stories of your life. I was wondering. I have a couple of questions. One, the wax cylinders that you brought from Kiev to Petersburg, is that material that is also in the Vernadski collection? And is it possible we would have heard any of it in some of what the Vernadski library has made available? Or is that completely separate material that none of us would have heard yet?
It's a separate material.
Yeah, okay. That's right. And another question is, what year did you and Mark connect? Maybe you said, I didn't.
When we connect in person.
Or when you first were, when did you start writing? When did you meet in person? Just quickly.
I guess our correspondence was even in the 70s. But when we met in Petersburg, maybe Mark remembered better when he visited Petersburg. I remember 1993.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we didn't meet actually in person until then. I guess until '93. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Yes, before, of course, Wesleyan University, 1989.
Well, '89 at Wesleyan.
'89, I was.
You see, there was the conference in '88 where we went to the Soviet Union, and I was the head of the American delegation. And then I got to choose the Americans, and the Soviets chose whoever they chose. And the idea was a return visit was at Wesleyan. And I just sent Izaly the photograph. I have the photograph of all of us at Wesleyan in that visit, the American and Soviet ethnomusicologists. And I guess that's when we actually met in person. Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Izaly, so much for sharing these stories. It's just incredible how much you really have done and just that dedication that you showed to this, and yeah, it's hard to imagine how much we owe to you. So thank you, and I hope we'll come back and hear some more of this later, especially some of these things about how the challenges of working in the Soviet system. I think it's clear sort of what you had to deal with, and that tells us about what Beregovski had to deal with, but there's a lot to unpack there. But maybe we can keep following the chronology, Mark, of that story and how you kind of came into it. Anything else around what Izaly said, and the work that you were doing at YIVO a little bit, just of how that fit in.
Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time telling too many more stories, but once all Jewish folk music was out, then it gave me a basis to, in a sense, to work more directly with Izaly. He knew who I was, and that book was there. And I sent a book to the Beregovskis. I actually have a letter from the Edda Beregovsky saying, "Where is the copy of the book?" Or something like that. But I think they got that, and I think they appreciated it. And then it occurred to me at some point, as the klezmer revival kept moving, that the source, I had the klezmer volume, and that the klezmer volume ought to be out there. And there's a small sample of klezmer songs in that in old Jewish folk music that came from the 1962 Soviet edition. But
Mark, we lost you there.
There are people out there like Michael Alpert and Bob Rothstein and Izaly.
Mark,
and so
your connection froze for a second. Can you trace back 3 sentences?
Sure. So I decided to put out since I had this courtesy of Izaly in my possession, the manuscript, that it would be possible to typeset the manuscript in some fashion, and now that we had computers, and go from the manuscript to a printed notations and put that in a book with annotations and critical apparatus and put that out. I enlisted Michael Alpert and Bob Rothstein and Izaly had written this beautiful appreciation of Beregovski that I put as the frontis, as the introduction to the whole volume. And then then we put together the volume that exists there with the in the form. And at the very last minute, I guess I don't know how. I guess Michael must have told Kurt, and Kurt said, "Well, you need a discography of where these things are on recordings," because he was a discographer type. So he produced a listing of where these tunes had, to that point, had been, where you could find those tunes on record. So that was a very helpful addition to the process. And I scrambled together photographs from the YIVO archive and also a couple from the Beregovski archive, courtesy of Bob Rothstein, because that's at the University of Massachusetts archives, photographs of the region in which Beregovski worked. And then I said, we should have a CD. So I invited people to exemplify the songs, and that compiled that CD. And somebody asked me the other day, what is the status of that CD? And when we were putting things online more, I suggested that we reissue that. And as I recall, Brave Old World said they didn't really want that reissued. And I think Deborah and Jeff said they didn't really want it reissued. So I said, well, then we can't really do that CD. But I still think that CD ought to be reissued, ought to be just put up online in your Beregovski forum, or in the appropriate place, because there's some really nice versions. There's stuff from Klezmer Conservatory Band, and there's some early 78s. I think it would be a nice tribute, to join the discography of Beregovski. It would be a nice addition for that.
Yeah, we'll do what we can.
So I guess that's all I would say at the moment. Right?
Cool. I'd love to hear from the people we haven't heard from. Mark, why did you involve Mark and Bob, and what were their roles? Or I imagine there was a lot of people that you might have brought into this project.
Well, I think Bob, Bob could speak for himself, but he's a linguist type and a text person, and a fine scholar in philology and things like that. And I wanted some control over how we were doing things. Technically, basically. So I thought that would be very. He also knows an enormous amount about Yiddish folklore, Russian folklore, Ruthenian folklore, Polish folklore, which he publishes on. I mean, he knows the region as a whole more than like anybody I know from the point of view of linguistics, but also folklore stuff. Despite what he says, he can sing a lot of songs. So I thought that's a kind of person that would be. A good. I'd gotten to know Bob. I lived. My wife taught at Amherst College in the '80s, and we lived in Amherst and got to know Bob and his wife Galina very well. And while I'm saying that, I need to credit more my wife, my late wife Greta, who grew up in the Soviet Union, was a native speaker, who did the translation of the Central Asia book I did. Her name is on that translation in 1975, along with mine, and who was very helpful all the way through this. She was an extraordinary person. So we had a bunch of people around, and it was in that Amherst period, I guess. And then Michael, of course, I knew he's the guy who, is the scholar and the researcher and has been collecting things for decades, and he should annotate this material and provide a basic working translation, which then Bob and I kind of went over for, the kind of more technical grounding of, and Bob was a great stickler for issues of language and terminology.
Yeah, I think we'll try to come back to those the translation challenges later. But let's hear from Bob.
There was one other story that's partially related that I forgot to tell, which is to say, and I think Izaly mentioned the name of Max Goldin from Riga,
right?
Who wrote some things in the Sovjetish Heimland, and among other things, said that the Beregovski about some forthcoming or the plan to publish some of Beregovsky's material. And I wrote to him asking if I could get permission to translate this stuff and publish it in the United States. And what came of that was I got some money from IREX to go and visit Golden, and met with somebody later in Moscow in the equivalent of our copyright office, and was told that sure, I can do it, but only after it's published in the Soviet Union. And that didn't happen until a number of years later. Well, I was, the other thing about the connection, the family connection that Mark mentioned, not only did we both have wives who were born in the Soviet Union, but in fact they were born in the same town of Orenburg in the Polish Jewish exile community there. Though for some reason the two families, the older generation, never met. And it wasn't, but people kept saying, oh, you should meet Mark Slobin and Greta because these various connections. And it wasn't until they spent time in Amherst that came to pass.
Huh. And were you aware of Beregovsky's work, or had you read, any of the Russian or Yiddish work by him before?
I had the what was it, 1982 Russian collection, this sort of anthology. I was aware of that.
Huh. And so in the process, your kind of role was, especially with language and translation, but also context.
Yeah, I was. I'm a good copy editor, and these days when publishers don't do any copy editing anymore, I get annoyed and write a nasty review saying this is a wonderful book, but it's a shame that it's spoiled by the lack of editing. So I was, as Mark said, conscientious about details, and was pleased to be able to contribute in that way.
Right, and so Michael, Mesh, you made the original translation, and then Bob, you and Mark edited that? Is that? Yeah. Sorry. Was there, and I mean, as you came to this work, given what you knew from other sources and the general context, were there some things that stood out, or things, things about his work that felt different, or new ideas that came?
No, as I said, I think in my first statement on this program, I'm not a musician. I'm a text person, and song text person. And although, as Mark said, I do know lots of songs, and for the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years, I've been teaching every year a one-credit Russian song course in one semester, and a one-credit Yiddish song course the other semester. Just basically, I don't claim to play any instrument, but I do claim to play at the guitar. So I taught students who were very interested Yiddish songs and Russian songs, accompanied in a manner of speaking by me.
But I think you were interested in the way Beregovsky talked about Ukrainian and mutual kind of influences, because that's sort of up your alley, right?
Yeah. And actually, Max Golden published later 3 articles in Sovietisch Hemland and on connections between Yiddish music, Yiddish folk songs, and Ukrainian, Moldavian, and German. And I got permission to translate those, and they were translated and published in sort of occasional papers of the UMass Slavic Studies program.
Mm. Yeah, the whole thing with the Golden Edition is interesting. I don't know if now's the time to get into it, but there were some interesting aspects of that and corrections, as they say, that he made. I'm curious, was there anything looking back on it that you sort of regrets or ways that you maybe wish it would have been done slightly differently or something? I don't know if that's a dangerous question, but
I have to ask Mark about that. I'm a technician, not more than a content editor.
right. Well, maybe let's hear from the other key player that we haven't gotten to as much yet, which is Mr. Michael Alpert, who made the primary translation and so many of those useful and interesting annotations. Thank you, Bob, so much. Michael.
Hi there.
When Mark asked you about this, had you heard of or encountered Beregovsky's work before that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, not necessarily in order of appearance, Mark's 1982 work, or the 1982 work that old Jewish folk music that kind of brought us Beregovsky. I had heard of Beregovsky probably around the time I moved to New York, which was 1979, and or maybe even a little earlier, 1978, when I was coming to visit a lot. From some Zev Feldman, Andy Statman, Barbara Kirschenbach-Gimblett, who were, and Henry Sapoznik was in there too, in terms of working with that group of people, starting to look at the YIVO archive, and there was the CETA Artist Project at the American Jewish Congress that we were all part of, other than Barbara, literally, but she was a consultant to it, and I believe. So that's when I really heard about Beregovsky and that there was work out there, and ultimately, as I came to understand, I mean, the term, the widespread use of the term klezmer music came from Beregovsky, and came into our parlance through some combination of Mark, Zev, Andy. That's the way I look at it. Although it turns out, I should mention that the term was used a couple of times in the Vorwärts in Yiddish in 1925, I believe, actually, as klezmer Musik with a dash in Yiddish, and also there was an article referring to a klezmer Kapelle. But yeah, that's how I first heard about Beregovsky, and dug into the 1982, Mark's 1982 work.
And in those early years in New York, were a number of musicians using that as a source for songs and context and information, or?
I would say not enough, and of course my focus was, I'll speak for myself in saying not enough, but my focus was always, if it's written down, or somehow recorded, it's already there. I'm interested in working with the stuff that's not written down, with finding people, with recording, documenting as much as I could of both musical material, language, Yiddish in its amazing variety, life stories, life histories, anything that had to do with East European Jewish culture, but with a focus on music and dance for sure, and language.
And had you done other official work as a translator or translating texts before this?
If I did, it was minimal. This was the first major project, although what I had done was started to transcribe, and in the process of transcribing, translate a significant chunk of my interviews with Ben Baesler, the Warsaw-born klezmer musician who lived in LA from the 1960s. And so that was probably my first foray into doing a sort of larger chunk of translation. What I had done also was written the notes to several, I'm not sure what order this all happened in, but to several recordings, such as some stuff on Global Village, of the Dave Terrace reissue, and that kind of thing. So I, and I wrote a bunch of grant narrative. So I was, I've always kind of been something of a writer. But this was for sure, a major kind of step up. Among the things I would have to say about it is, I didn't feel like what I did. I mean, what I've done is often kind of spoken about as a kind of literal translation, and it certainly, I don't feel it was that. I've been kind of looking back at some of the material recently. While, I mean, of course, Mark and Bob edited. I mean, for one thing, it took me so long to do it that, I didn't even get to the chance to, to edit it myself first. But in terms of Mark and Bob's editing, I think there was, a lot of great stuff that in terms of making, combining sentences, of avoiding repetition. My approach, however, had been to, as faithfully as possible, render what Beregovski said and how he put it. And I mean, one thing that comes to mind is the choice of terms. I mean, Beregovski used the term tonality, what we would translate into English as tonality, tonalность in Russian and tonalitet in Yiddish, to refer to what we might sometimes call pitch, or more accurately, key, in English. I was just noticing Mark and Bob wanted to change that to pitch, and in fact, in doing the 2015 edition, motivated by Kurt, we decided to change that back to tonality. And there were a lot of little things like that I want to sort of just make some mention of, or note that. There are probably ways in which we would all do things. For sure there are ways in which we would all do things differently at this point.
Yeah, always. Yeah, I wonder if, I don't know, it'd be interesting one day to see like a really direct translation, and but I'm sure that had you done that, it would have been much more difficult for us who don't understand the context.
No, not necessarily. I actually was. I mean, I have all that stuff in my computer. I was actually thinking of, like taking another look at it, and maybe, sending it around or giving it to people like you and others to, to have a look at. It's not hugely different. It's just there are ways Beregovski put things, and I wanted to keep some of his Soviet academic style. Mark and Bob wanted to make it just, a little more accessible to people, but it's not like it's gobbledygook.
Right. Right. I think we're likely going to come back and probably do a whole full session on a lot of these issues with you. So maybe let's not get too deep into the details of translation now. I'm curious, just briefly, with the annotations, if we can sort of touch on it. Was there a lot more that you made, and you sort of like, were those edited also by Mark and Bob?
No, I think not. I mean, Mark and Bob would have to speak to that, but when I read those, I feel like it's much more in my voice. And Mark and Bob, you could speak to this. I didn't have the sense that you really.
No, I don't recall editing your annotations.
Yeah, right, right.
Uh-huh.
And I'd like to thank you for that. I wanted to say this.
I was just so happy to get them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I drove them up a wall by taking some. I was working at YIVO at the time and going on tour and just, kind of marching to the beat of a different barabanщик. So eventually it got out there.
Right. I want to ask you a question, Mark. When you were putting this together, had you heard any of the recordings?
The only time I heard recordings was that visit to Petersburg or Leningrad that Izaly mentioned. I visited the institute, and they allowed me to listen to a couple of these cylinders in the following way, because they had this terrible copy off cylinders, of which they then played on a terrible tape recorder with terrible speakers, and had me sit in another room with a speaker that transmitted all that to me. Okay, that's how I heard the Beregovski cylinders the first time. It was just about indecipherable, but it was such an honor and a privilege to be allowed to actually go to Pushkinsky Dom, because my wife used to work at Pushkin House. It was the great place for literary scholarship. And as Izaly said, why they were supposed to end up with these cylinders, I mean, it's a little weird. They were not a music institution. They were not a Jewish institution. They were a literature institution. So they weren't letting that stuff out. And they, by great goodwill, allowed me to sit in this fashion and listen to a few minutes of it.
Uh-huh. Wow. And now we just go on to the Vernadski website and we can hear so much.
Right. Right. Well,
times have changed. Which I think brings us to you, Lyudmila Sholokhova. Can we put you on the spotlight and unmute you? And you've done a lot of work with the Vernadski archives, yes?
Yeah. I began in 1993, I would say. It was interesting because I was making a completely independent way into Jewish music, separately from all American musicians, being isolated in Ukraine. It was an interesting journey. So the materials were discovered by chance in 1993. After the conference in Beregovsky that took place at the Kiev Conservatory in the spring of 1993, when I went to this conference, and I have heard that the recordings were lost. And when I came back to work, I shared this with my supervisor. And she said that she saw some of the cylinders in the other department of the Vernadski Library, which just moved to the same building from location on Podol, and we went there together to see these cylinders. She said that she saw approximately 40. When the staff members started showing us the materials, we just realized that there is much more than 40. Many more cylinders actually surfaced, and we counted about 51 boxes of cylinders with 20 cylinders in each box. Wow. It was a major discovery, and there were also tons, really thousands of pages of related documents and transcriptions. It was not all klezmer music, of course. It was Yiddish folk songs and religious synagogue music, so everything together. So I all of a sudden I was, and at that time I was working at the musical division. So it was just by accident. It came to me like a big privilege as I became a key person to access these materials and to do the first survey of them. There were some materials already available to the public at the manuscript division, but it was mostly like Slavic folklore and text of the folk songs. So I started just really looking into everything and just trying to to build the entire picture, what is there, and it was a journey. So then I had to focus on something. I was still working on my PhD, and I switched from French music to the Jewish music, and I had to make some priorities for myself. So in order to, well, I decided to write a dissertation on Jewish music, but I had to focus on something. So I decided to write about the history, about collecting Jewish music and like foundation of Jewish music folk studies in the pre-revolutionary Russia. It was so much. At the same time, we discovered archives of Kisirgov and Ansky, and I started learning Yiddish. And then, in addition to the dissertation, I had to focus on what actually to do in the library, and also I focused on the phono cylinders. Because I thought this is basically like it must be a priority. This is the most important part of the collection. So, and I was doing my duties as a librarian. Then from the music division, I was moved to the Jewish division, and I became a research associate, which gave me a little bit more freedom to focus on the research. And then the library became in the spotlight. We received visits from the scholars around the world, particularly from the National Library of Israel. It was Israel Adler, who came to Kiev several, I think 5 or 6 times, many times. And we started considering what we're going to do with all this heritage, considering all kind of collaborative projects. But in Ukraine, it was not so easy. So eventually, it was decided to go on our own, only the Vernadski Library without any collaboration. So I did, and actually, what is important now to mention that when I first kind of started working with these materials, and I started reading about Beregovski and everything by Beregovski, I found a picture of my great-grandfather in the klezmer volume. It was Yehiel Goizman, Alpert Chutnever. It was I was a direct descendant. It was also something that greatly motivated me.
Yeah, wow.
And then it was because Goizman is my maiden name. What else? And I discovered more music by Yehiel Goizman, Alpert Chutnever, in the Beregovski Library, in the Vernadski Library.
Things that weren't published, but
also, I actually wanted to point out that it was only in the American edition that I saw his music published, because in the Soviet edition, this music, like all big concerto compositions, klezmer concerto compositions were taken out. So this was only in the American edition that I discovered them, but there was more.
There's more transcriptions than what are in any of the published editions, you mean?
No, it was manuscript. Manuscript. I have copies. My husband, Yuval Waldman, recorded these compositions. Especially Vatikva, variations on Vatikva theme, which is not in the volume, but it's also very elaborated. And it was a piece. And interesting. What else? And then I know that there are many questions about the klezmer recordings in the Beregovski collection. Why there are so few? When we're actually working on the reconstruction of the collection, creating a digital version of all these recordings together with the Institute for Information Recording at the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, and I was particularly paying attention to klezmer music. I wanted to bring out every single recording, and there were very few, and the ones that actually were there were of bad quality. So I did everything possible to basically to bring it out, and specifically because I was working so much with Zev Feldman. He's my good friend. I know about his interest, and he was working on his book, so I really was trying, but just very few survived. And among those, very few actually were of a good quality, presentable quality. So at some point in the future, when we kind of start a new stage of the entire Beregovsky project, and we will come to the point when we will put everything online, and it's actually my dream, we will publish everything, regardless of the quality, and maybe we can improve the quality. That's my input.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting because when you play the wax cylinders, every time it makes the quality worse, right?
Yes, but it was already no. But at this yes, in those years, I think many phono cylinders were simply reused because for some, I understand that there were a lot of budget constraints and they had to reuse the cylinders. So once he would just really decipher the music, he would simply write something over it, to just clean it and write new music on it, record new music on it.
Right.
It was technique.
And for him to transcribe the tunes, he had to listen to the cylinders.
Yes,
so I imagine he already listened to the instrumental ones many times, or at least a few.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons, and the second reason that's simply reuse them.
Right. Yeah.
And then also the third reason, it's time, because with the time the cylinders were not in the climate control, and remarkably, like magically, they survived in pretty good quality. If you compare the quality of the, for example, other cylinders from with Ukrainian folklore, Jewish folklore survived in much better quality, and I had a chance to compare. So it's we're still lucky.
Right. And do you know, how did the cylinders and all this material from Beregovsky get to Vernadski? Like, it was there since.
I think about they ended up there after the cabinet for Jewish culture was shut down in 1949. There is the entire story. There is like actually now this story unveils, and there are researchers that pay much more attention to it. And I have to mention that there is a documentary film that is about Beregovsky that now is almost finished, and the filmmaker did a remarkable job. Really, she went everywhere, and she collected whatever was possible. She came really. She got into the archives in St. Petersburg and in Ukraine, and she came to the United States. She filmed at YIVO when I was still there. Some remnants of the Beregovsky archive ended up at YIVO, but not klezmer music. It's mostly songs.
Hey, Mila, before you go, Mark, I wanted to ask Mila one question. I seem to remember that when you were first telling me about this, you mentioned that when you first sort of went looking for these when you first come looking for this material, that they had been moved recently, or somehow you became aware that they were in one building or another building.
Oh, it was a very long. Yeah, it was like I don't know, beginning of 1990s. It was a very long time ago because these materials were. It was just the time when the new building of the entire Vernadski Library was constructed, and some of the departments moved to the new building, and some of the departments moved from the branches to the older building. That was a period of moving. And myself, I started at the other building, and the music division moved, and the Department of Special Collections moved, and these materials were in that department. Just they were there for many, many years. And I don't want to be like really to give you some maybe pieces of incorrect information, but there is someone who is writing about this journey currently, and he would be much more specific than I am. At that time I didn't pay so much attention to the history. and you have to be there. You really have to keep the all these local archives took really to trace how the collections were moved, to get access to the internal library archive. Even that is not enough, because not everything there. It's a detective story.
I heard this, I don't know where I heard this rumor once that the KGB had taken some of Beregovsky's materials in the KGB archives.
When he was arrested.
Yeah.
Beregovsky was arrested, yes. Some of his, yes, of course. Not only he was arrested, but also his archive. And then they returned it to his wife.
Then how did it get from KGB to Vernadski then? That's what I don't quite understand.
That's another part. That was his private. That was like, it was a professional archive and private archive.
Yes. Not the cabinet, right. I get it.
And so what happened?
And also, Izaly mentioned some cylinders that he took to St. Petersburg. I think these cylinders, just by chance, were in his apartment. Actually, these cylinders that are now St. Petersburg and the Vernadski Library, they constitute one whole, I think.
Right. And do you know what happened to the KGB, the material that KGB took?
They returned it to his wife.
And maybe this will lead us back to...
Yeah, I also wasn't in this apartment that Izaly describes. When he went to pick up, when his older daughter died, Edna arranged for the Vernadski Library to go and pick up the remaining materials. So I went to this apartment. I remember it. It was a separate story. It was completely. It was a building was almost completely abandoned, and it was in very bad condition. And I think only maybe Beregovsky's family still was hanging in there. It was shaking. This stairway was so. I felt like I'm on the boat.
Can you describe a little more what's exactly in Vernadski now? Like, there's his transcriptions and writings. Like I asked you before about the information forms that he got from the informants, the questionnaire, and this stuff.
To be like, I can describe you what is there. There are phone cylinders. There are texts to the phone cylinders. There are texts to the. There are some transcriptions in his handwriting, maybe in his colleague's handwriting. There are very few manuscripts, like musical manuscripts from the Beregovsky period. There is a chunk. And there is oral folklore, and there is also a Kisilgov collection, which is actually a remarkable collection in itself. And there is Kisilgov private archive and also his collection, and it's a lot of manuscripts. This is where you find the klezmer manuscript, not so much in the like Beregovsky. From Beregovsky's expeditions. Most of the klezmer manuscripts that survived are in the Kisilgov collection. I think there is a lot of confusion of what is actually there.
Yeah.
So, according to what has to do with the Beregovsky expeditions, we have most of the cylinders, we have Kisilgov cylinders, we have Ansky cylinders together in one collection. And the second part is manuscripts. So manuscripts from the Beregovsky part. It's a typescript of the lyrics, and there is very little original musical transcriptions. And there are also his transcriptions from the klezmer albums in the standard form, with the standard pages. His transcriptions. And there is a separate part is Kisilgov collection that actually contains a lot of manuscripts. Songs, liturgical music, nigunim, and klezmer music. These, and also Purim spiel.
And
that's and there is more.
Is it possible for people to
the most important structure?
Mm-hmm. And can people go and visit the Vernadski Library and actually see this stuff, or it's or?
I think people can go and study the materials in the reading room. It's open to the public. Well, you cannot go and listen to the recording because the recordings, the digital versions of the recordings are in a separate building.
Right. And you have the original transcriptions that he made before he put them in the book, because he published them all in the key of G, but I'm assuming first he transcribed them in the original key.
Yes, there are many original transcriptions by him in his handwriting or maybe his associates. He made selections. It was not possible to publish everything. There is, of course, much more.
Right.
Much more.
Interesting. Wow. Thank you so much for all the work you've done with this stuff. It's really incredible and given us so many resources.
The last thing that whatever you hear on the website is also only selections. But on the CDs, which are actually not the CDs, but CD-ROMs, you can also see some transcriptions, which you cannot see online. Well, because I think that's the difference. You can hear sound, but on the CD-ROMs themselves, they contain more information. Eventually, we will come to the point that we will put everything what is there online, but we need a lot of money and a lot of support from the foundations.
Can you give us a sense, I know you've written about this too, can you give us a sense of what actually the different components of the recordings are? Because a lot of the recordings that are important to us and the work that is important to us were recordings from the Ansky expeditions. And then, as you mentioned, I mean, it's Kiselhov having part of that. Can you give us a sense of what, how much is Ansky, how much is Kiselhov, how much of,
I cannot. I can make a mistake in the actual exact numbers. I think Beregovski proper recordings. I think it's about 60% of the body of the collection, and then the rest is Ansky materials, Engel and Kiselhov. I mean, when I say Ansky, it's not his, but from the expeditions. But I can look up the numbers.
In the course of particularly my long years of field work and other kind of music making and so forth with Soviet Jews in New York, especially in New York and LA. But I would, ask a lot of people, do you know about this archive? Do you know about these materials? And of course, certain people had, but, we were told, I think, as you, implied in what you were saying too, that the material had been destroyed. I mean, I think the most common story people would tell about it was, oh, it was taken out, by the KGB out to a field outside, blown up. And I remember someone, very possibly Mark, saying, I'm kind of surprised if that really happened, because the KGB doesn't tend to, or the NKVD, the KGB didn't tend to destroy stuff. They just locked it up and threw away the key.
I have just one quick question there. I know during the war, Beregovski collected some non-Jewish music while he was, at a safe place outside of Kiev. Did he do other collecting of non-Jewish music, or was it mostly Jewish music that he was focused on?
Beregovski? Well, in this specific collection, only Jewish music. Well, I think there are some. For example, when he was recording music in Crimea or in southern Ukraine, he also recorded some German songs from the German residents there. I know that he was also recorded some Karaim music, but I think, and this is a little bit of this is also in Ukraine at the other institution, I think, of Ukrainian language and Institute for Ukrainian Language and Literature, at the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. There you can find some of his notations, but no cylinders.
Interesting. I'm curious, Izaly, if just being somebody else that's worked with a lot of this stuff and seen the different archives, are there some things that maybe you've encountered in some place that we haven't talked about yet? And what did you find in Beregovski's apartment when you went there?
Well, I told you, I've been just in 3 rooms. Room, like a guest room, dining room, archive room, and different letters room. Apparently, it was another room for the kind of a bedroom, but I was not allowed there. So
Did you?
this is the only I remember those rooms. The most, of course, is that post office room. It was filled up by letters up to the very high ceiling. It was amazing. Something much bigger than archives in Beregovsky.
And did you ever see some of the forms that the informants filled out? Would you know where they went?
I didn't get the question.
Вы знаете, где анкеты, которые заполняли информанты?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like he says Makhnovetsky wrote 40 pages. I think there's so much information there. One of our questions to find. But Beregovsky published the instrumental book, his dissertation, during the war. Yeah, 1943. Do you think there's any reason why he did this at that time?
He didn't publish at that time. He defends it as his PhD.
Right.
It was not a publication. But in Izaly, the archive in Moscow, there is a whole stenogram, the whole manuscript of all the procedure with all documents, including his speech, his questions to him, his answers, amazing answers, and everything. It's a huge volume of, but it was never published. First, I published except from those in my article in Musical Academy, but it was not completely printed.
And is there a copy of the dissertation defense somewhere, or it's just in the?
I copy for myself. Being in archive, I copy the whole discussion by myself. I have here in my room here.
Do you recall how close Beregovsky's PhD dissertation is to the 1948 work, what became the Klezmer volume? Do you have some idea of that?
Very close, of course. Very close. But much bigger.
Was there stuff in the dissertation defense that, like, interesting other information, I'm sure?
Yes, dissertation is bigger than published work.
So that's the next project.
That's amazing. Are there additional transcriptions there, or is it just that their text is larger?
Text is more, not additional transcriptions.
And for you, when you were working, like, I assume in the Soviet Union, you couldn't just decide to photocopy whatever you want and to work on whatever you want even. Yeah, you had to have some strategy.
Oh, yes. It was actually for photocopying machine. It was not only photocopying machine, typewriters were registered by KGB. Because if you type something anti-Soviet, they have to know who typed it on which machine. So even to copy those volumes which we with Alma brought to YIVO, we have a special permission for photocopy. It was very difficult. Don't ask for detail now. For normal American people, it's impossible to imagine. You know, just one detail. It's when I had to copy some lullabies. It happened to be in French. And director of that company, which is a copy machine, asked me, how do you know that there's lullabies? Because I know French. No, it's not enough for us. You have to bring a document that it's real French and it's real lullaby and it's real allowed to copy. And then we copy for you. Can you imagine? So it's don't go to details. It's very bad. Fortunately, I was able to copy by hand many things.
Ah. And you still have all of those notes?
Oh yes, just behind my bed. In another room, yes.
Hi, Izaly. So I guess, if it was so challenging to make these copies, how did you manage to copy these editions that you then brought with you to the United States?
You know, so that people are, smart enough to avoid many regularities. To follow regularities and to avoid them is two gifts together. You know, sometimes we use the copy machine which we have in our institute. But for that it was necessary to bring additional papers because papers was not enough as well. And I did it. So partly we copied in my institute, partly we copied it by goodwill people somewhere else. Then we copied something in your institute. And Alma copied something in the Museum of Ethnography of People of the USSR when she was the head of the Department of Central Asia and Diplomacy. And actually, she organized the concert of Jewish songs, of Jewish music in the 80s, 87, 1987, which, who knows, which Mike remembers. Michael remembers this. Michael remembers everything. You can trust his memory. Probably Michael remembers how Alma herself told the story being in New York and that told me apart. It was a remarkable story. Maybe sometimes we will see Alma's story. It deserves to be published.
Yeah, and I'm curious what the introduction that you wrote, the short introduction that Mark included in the English edition.
Yes.
When you wrote that, were you thinking? Did you have to worry about the Soviet censors? Because was that in
No.
87? No, it was later. Oh, that was nine.
No. That time already no.
No,
it was already different time.
So many dates.
It was already different time.
And I'm curious, Mark, you decided to include Izaly's introduction, and otherwise the text is straight from Beregovski. I mean, translated obviously, but There's no additional
Right.
materials.
I don't think so. I'll look at the book. Should have the book next to me to see, but
I mean, it wasn't
no,
clear from the start that you wanted to just present the work and not create kind of a critical edition, or
yeah.
And
Well, I mean, the annotations, Michael's annotation
of
are a
course,
critical edition, right? Yeah.
right. But I mean, was there ever thought to create a bigger edition with essays and?
No, that would be nice, but no. I did those three books at the same time. So there's American Klezmer, it's Roots and Offshoots, which has an essay from Michael, and and Bob Rothstein's article on klezmer and Lushan, and a lot of other things. So I was working on that, working on this edition, and then I was working on Fiddler on the Move, my own book on the klezmer revival. So yeah, that was. Those all came out at the same time. I don't quite understand how that all happened simultaneously, but somehow those all came out at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean that must just have been a pretty incredible moment for you, getting all of those out, and I mean just to have the motivation, focus to do that. I imagine there was a real fire inside.
Well, I mean, when I did Old Jewish Folk Music, it's when I was doing tenement songs. They came out the same year also. So I don't understand myself. I look back at this and I don't understand how I did any of that. But apparently I had a lot of energy and focus.
Yeah, thank God for that.
It's sort of evaporating over time, I guess.
Let's hope not. I wanted to just ask a bit about what happened after both Old Jewish Folk Music and especially the instrumental book were published, and kind of how they disseminated out into the world and how folks saw that. I'm sure Michael will have some stories, and I remember you talking about, Mark, an edition getting to East Germany, to Heiko.
Oh, I mean, I have only anecdotal evidence. I mean, the book was reviewed here and there, not that much, but you never know what's going to happen to a book when you put it out. When I put out Old Jewish Folk Music, I didn't know it was going to become kind of a Bible for the movement, but so it was extremely gratifying that happened. The one anecdote I repeated was at some point I met Heiko Lehmann, and he said that when he was in East Germany as a kid, one of his friend's father was a diplomat who was in New York, found Old Jewish Folk Music and brought it to East Berlin. And that's how they began, being able to be a klezmer group, because they had a source for the first time. They had been rumored and they'd heard a couple recordings, a couple CDs, but they didn't have any documentation. So it sort of went to a lot of places and sparked a lot of activity, which is exactly what I wanted, and it was wonderful. When I got the accounts of that, it was very pleasant.
Yeah, Maish, do you have anything to add to that?
My recollection is that Old Jewish Folk Music, it remained a cult classic for a number of years, to the point that around 1994, 5, 6, Shulamis Dion, who had been doing graduate work on klezmer music, and if I'm not mistaken, on the klezmer revitalization, sort of famously stood up one evening at Klez Camp and held a waved a copy of the Beregovski at people, kind of like the rights of man and so forth, and said the famous sentence, "People, use your Beregovski," which became the source of a lot of parody and jokes and stuff like that. But it wasn't immediate, and I think the publication of the klezmer volume was more because of the 1982 volume being so significantly, to a significant extent being composed of Yiddish songs and being about Yiddish songs and having other articles. The klezmer volume suddenly there were 258 tunes that burst upon the scene, and I also think, given the emphasis on working by ear and working from sound sources rather than from music, it took a while for this all to kind of catch on. And my impression is that only with the entrance of more and more people into the klezmer music scene, people that had especially classical music background and who were fluent readers of notation, in some cases more so than being ear musicians. That's when I feel like the use of and the awareness of the Beregovski manuscripts really emerged.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've been talking a bit how, even among instrumentalists, there's so much more work, I think, that we can do to uncover stuff, both the tunes and just studying the text and the work that Beregovski did. But I mean, among singers, there's even more stuff to uncover, I think. It's tough to learn a song from a book on whether, any instrument or voice. But for whatever reason, I think, for a variety of reasons, that's maybe been taken up a little bit less by singers in the past. Which kind of leads me, I think, to a place that might be good for wrapping up, because it's been a while now, which I'm curious just to hear from different people. What do you think are some important next steps that hopefully, the younger generation of folks like myself who have benefited so much from all the work that you've done, what are some places that we might go, or really just any other thoughts that you might have? Before I want to get to that, I want to put one word in Mark Slobin's mouth, though, because to the point I just made, we were talking the other day about I think it's volume 2 of the folk songs and other such stuff that Beregovski made. That's never been published still in English and sits somewhere in YIVO, right?
In 1983 or something like that, I got this phone call from YIVO saying, we found something in the closet in the library you might want to look at. There was a closet they found all kinds of treasures in that nobody had bothered to open this closet. And Dina calls and says, you might want to see this. It was the proofs of the second volume, which is the second folk song volume, with Beregovski's proofing of it. And nobody knows what it was doing there. And that was not allowed to be published, that volume, in the Soviet Union. I don't know. As far as I know, nobody's published volume 2, have they? Or I thought everything was published by now, but I'm not sure volume 2 ever has been. I just want to say one more thing before we leave this guy, and I wrote this in the article that I wrote in, I think, 1990 in Ethnomusicology Journal. This man was an extraordinary, he wasn't just a Jewish, obscure guy. He was a major European ethnomusicologist, and his breadth of vision of ethnomusicology and how you do what the Soviets call folkloristics is extraordinary, and he should be better known. That's why I wrote that article. He should be better known to the general ethnomusicology world and also to the European folklore world, who probably still doesn't know who he is. If you compare, you say he was the Jewish Bartok, because Bartok did all those volumes of folk song publication. But Bartok wasn't in the slightest bit interested in the things that we value Beregovski for, which is thinking about the point of view of the musicians and the people themselves, and the point of interethnic contact, and instrumental music. Beregovski had no interest in any of those issues. He wanted to produce a formal system of folk music study where he had little structural, things, and then composers could use it. And he put out all this stuff. Yeah, Bartok. Beregovski had a much more interesting mind, and I've mentioned, and I think Christina can maybe support that, that I think Brailoiu was the right person to compare him to, the great Romanian ethnomusicologist, folklorist, who had a similarly broad vision. And some of Brailoiu has been published, actually by Barbara Crater. So I think we have to think of him as a world-class figure, and as a European, major figure within European stuff, and he never gets his due, I think, from the sort of establishment of that kind of studies, because Jewish culture was nipped in the bud, and because these sources weren't published, and so I always think that's kind of a shame, because, and I think Izaly would probably agree as well. He's an extraordinary figure on that scale of world scholarship.
Yeah. Thanks for making that point. I think that's really important. It's like even within our bubble of Jewish music, he doesn't get enough, sort of acknowledgement or work. People aren't digging into his work enough. But yeah, even outside of that, he's hugely important. There's a whole lot I'd love to get into about his life and just who he was as a person. He did so many interesting things there in Kiev, and just the way he was sort of dedicated to the music throughout his life was incredible. But I think we'll have to leave some of that for a future session, because it's getting a bit late here, and some of us have to go do things.
Well, I just want to thank everybody who put in work on this, and you guys who were the keepers of the flame, and continuing this on into the future, where I think there will be more resonance. So, great. Yasher Koich, everybody, and may Beregovski live on in many ways.
Yeah, thank you, really. And here, I think Christina wants to say something. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Mark. And so some of you may have seen an archival webpage that I put together as like a follow-up for the first Beregovski Online Forum, and it's going to get better, but the first draft of it has links to videos that people made. It has the edited video that Craig edited of the entire session. It has a preliminary bibliography of works by Beregovski and works that cite Beregovski.
Bibliography, as Christina mentioned, is really very important. And I suggest that we get another person on board. It's Zhenya Hasdan from St. Petersburg, who did a lot of research on the Beregovski archive now in St. Petersburg, and she wrote a number of articles. And actually, her articles, who are important by themselves, also contain bibliography of Beregovski's work that it's not really known to the general public. So it's really, I can get in touch with her, and if she is interested, she might want to share her works and the detailed bibliography.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
It's important.
It is. Yeah. I'm curious if people want to support the work that's happening in Vernadski, which I hope they do. Is there any easy way for them to do that? Is there a donation button on the website, or is it something that we can help arrange?
I don't know. I don't know, but I think the next stage will be when we basically move on, and I think the next stage will be to place all of this heritage online, regardless of the quality of sound and all transcriptions of text and music. Then at that point, probably we would need the input. I think the occasional donations, I'm not sure. I'm not there. I'm not. Right. I don't know. I think later on it would become essential.
Yeah. I hope maybe we can do a GoFundMe or something. Any other last words to the general public out there, Mila?
No.
Great.
Just thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's tremendous. It's really what's happening now. It's really something quite outstanding, and it will bring results. In what shape, format, we don't know yet. but it's going to bring us somewhere.
Yeah, well, thank God, there's some good things that come out of this crazy situation in the world and this technology that we have. But, it's impossible for people like me to imagine what it was like for somebody like Izaly to be, writing down these hand notes and figuring out how to copy these pages, how to get to America. It's like we take so much for granted, and we can be more grateful for this work that everyone has done. I think I want to quickly, Bob, can I check in with you real quick? I just wanted to say, your work with this book and with a number of other things has been really so essential and useful for so much of it. And I don't know, I just want to express, I think, how much all of us appreciate that. And even though, a lot of people might not necessarily know who you are, or like they haven't seen you speak at some, klezmer festival, I'm really glad that we got to actually see you and meet you and share a little bit of your vast knowledge.
Thank you for that, and thank you for letting me join the group.
Oh, it is our big honor and pleasure to have you.
I think you joined the group before we invited you.
Right, we joined your group. Mish, do you have any closing thoughts, or should I just give it to Izaly to send us home?
Yeah, no, just thank you for, amazing to be here with you all. And thank you to everyone for making this happen, young and older, etc. Jung is jeder wer es will know.
I think our time is just about come to a close. And Izaly, I'd just like to give you the floor one more time to share with us any thoughts you have, any closing words.
Well, thank you very much. I am extremely happy today and delighted to see that Beregovsky is living today even more vigorously than during his lifetime. Thank you for everything, and I hope we will be in touch.
Yes.
Not once. Not twice.
Thank you. It's it's so special to have you all here, and I really look forward to being more in touch, to seeing the conversation on the Facebook group, and to seeing what more comes from the Vernadski Library, to see the documentary about Beregovsky, and so many things that I think are coming up now. And I hope everybody out there in Radio Land, our dear followers, listeners, really understood everything. I'm going to do my best with the volume for you all. And send us your questions and stay with us, where we'll have a lot more content coming out, and we'll follow some of these stories. There's so many things. Let's all honor the work that these folks have done, and that Mr. Beregovsky himself did, and make sure we find those missing pieces and draw the connections, and of course play the music and sing the songs, and keep it all Lebedik. I guess we'll sign out then. So I'm going to unmute everybody, and we can just say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. This is
Soon.
Bye-bye.
Papa.